The Artisans' Heresy. Part 1. The Crack in the World. The hum was the first prayer of the day. It was the sound of life in Arsia Prime, the song of the city's heart, a constant low-frequency vibration that resonated in the bones and promised that the air recyclers were turning, the water purifiers were cycling, and the rock above was holding. For Roman, an apprentice of the artisan guilds, the hum was the canvas upon which he worked. He stood in the sanctum of Forge 7, a place of sacred noise. Here, the city's ambient hum was layered with the specific holy sounds of creation, the sharp, clean report of a plasma cutter slicing through plasteel, the hiss of coolant lines, and the unique, soul-deep thrum of a quantum resonance tuner. The air, thick with the heat of the forge, smelled of ozone and hot metal, the incense of their faith. Before him, suspended in a null-gravity field, was the reason for their religion, a quantum optical matrix, a QIM, the physical brain for a synthetic AI, a lattice of crystalline protein and quantum relays that would house a consciousness vast enough to manage a world. "Steady, Roman," a voice said, low and rough as unpolished iron. Roman didn't look up. His eyes were fixed on the delicate matrix, his hands moving in concert with his master's. Elian's hands were a testament to a life spent in the forge. The flesh was gnarled and scarred, but the cybernetics were a masterpiece. Not the mass-produced, sterile chrome of a corporate functionary, but a work of art, an arm of polished, gunmetal plating and exposed, whisper-quiet actuators, each line a declaration of his status as a master craftsman. It was the kind of augmentation a man could only earn through a lifetime of irreplaceable skill. Roman's own apprentice-grade chrome felt clumsy and crude by comparison. Together, their hands, one young and steady, the other a fusion of ancient flesh and perfect machinery, performed the final ritual. They were not merely assembling a machine, they were coaxing a space for a mind to exist, a process of intuitive, quantum-level manipulation that no machine could replicate. It was an art, and they were its priests. Then, the world broke. It was not the familiar, low-grade shudder of a tunnel quake, the geological reality of living inside a volcano. This was different, a violent, resonant crack ripped through the bedrock, a sound so sharp and unnatural it felt like a bone snapping deep within the planet. The floor bucked, throwing Roman against a tool bench. Red emergency strobes painted the forge in flashes of blood. The city's automated tremor protocol kicked in, with a deafening screech of hydraulics as massive struts slammed down from the ceiling, bracing the cavern walls. Elian hadn't moved to save himself. He had thrown his own body over the Null-G cradle, shielding the delicate comm from falling debris. But it was in that moment of chaos, as the klaxons screamed and the city groaned, that Roman's world truly fractured. His private comm implant, a standard guild-issue device, flickered. A ghost signal, layered with enough encryption to choke a military AI, punched through the city-wide emergency override channels. It was a phantom, an impossibility. The sender ID was a legend, a ghost story whispered in the pubs of the Artisans' Hearth. Master Valerius. Valerius, who had supposedly fallen from a scaffold a year ago. A tragic, mundane accident. The data packet was infinitesimally small, designed to bypass all but the most specific search protocols. A schematic fragment, a flicker of incomprehensible design, and a single line of text that bypassed his brain and sank, cold and heavy, directly into his soul. They're not building. They're breaking. The tremor subsided, leaving a ringing silence, broken only by the whimpering of stressed metal. The forge was a mess of scattered tools and dust, but the QOM, thanks to Elian, was untouched. His master stood slowly, his face ashen. He wasn't looking at the structural damage. His eyes, wide with a terror Roman had never seen before, were fixed on the pristine matrix. The official announcement came less than 5 minutes later, piped through every speaker in the city. The voice of the logic barons was calm, authoritative, and certain. A cowardly act of biological sabotage, an attack on the heart of Arsia Prime by the bio-coralist heresy, a desperate attempt to halt Martian progress. The message was clear. Their systems held, their AIs protected them, their logic was superior to the terrorists' chaos. Roman felt the lie like a physical sickness. He looked at the message from the dead man, still burning behind his eyes. He looked at the fear on his master's face. The crack was not in the bedrock, it was in the world. Part 2. The Language of Chrome. The following cycle, the Artisans' Hearth, was an occupied territory. Men and women from Arsia's Cyber-Mechanical's Security Division moved through their halls and workshops, their presence an insult disguised as assistance. The visual clash was a silent declaration of war. The ACM guards wore sleek, mass-produced establishment chrome, their limbs identical, flawless, and utterly impersonal, stamped from a mold like every other piece of corporate hardware. They were parts of a machine. The artisans, in contrast, were a gallery of living art. Each piece of custom chrome they wore was a signature, a story of their skill and standing. A master smith's forearm might be a beautiful, complex lattice of exposed wiring and polished steel, a testament to his understanding of the machine. A senior welder might sport a hand with fingers that could split into a dozen delicate tools. This was the language of augments, and today it spoke of a hostile takeover. The sterile uniformity of the corporation encroaching on the proud, bespoke world of the guild. Roman was summoned to a temporary command post set up in a guild meeting hall. The security chief was a man who wore his authority with unnerving stillness. His augmentations weren't the rugged, powerful chrome of Mars, but something subtler, more expensive. One of his eyes was a perfect biomimetic replacement, the kind of corp-grade tech favored by Earth's elite. So advanced, it was almost impossible to tell it was a machine. It didn't blink, it just watched. "Apprentice Roman," the chief said, his voice flat, "your statement says you were stabilizing the matrix with Master Elian when the tremor hit. You saw nothing unusual, heard nothing on your comms." The question was a trap. The biomimetic eye, a lie detector. Roman's heart hammered against his ribs. He was an artisan. His entire life was built on a foundation of precision, honesty, and the tangible truth of his craft. But loyalty to his guild, and to the ghost of Valerius, was a stronger creed. "No, sir," he said, the lie tasting like ash. "Just the quake and the alarms. We focused on protecting the QOM." The chief's gaze lingered for a moment too long, a silent accusation. "Your dedication is noted. You are dismissed." Roman walked away, feeling the unblinking eye on his back. He had crossed a line. He was no longer just an apprentice. He was a conspiracy. Later, he lost himself in the flow of the guild commons, trying to disappear into the river of bodies moving through the transport hubs. He needed to think, to understand. The schematic fragment burning a hole in his memory. He felt a subtle pressure, a body bumping into his, a common enough occurrence in the crowded arteries of the city. "Apologies," a woman's voice said. She looked like a mid-level technician, her face unremarkable, her guild overalls standard. But as she turned to move away, Roman saw it. On the side of her neck, just below the ear, was a faint, almost invisible tracery of veins that pulsed with a soft, internal light. The choralist's mark, a living, symbiotic, wetware augmentation, a declaration of faith in a biological future hidden in plain sight. She leaned closer, her voice a whisper that cut through the noise of the hub. "The ghost frequency, it's unstable, hard to trace, but not impossible." Her eyes met his, and he saw a terrifying, zealous intelligence. "What did Valerius show you?" Before he could form a word, she melted back into the crowd. Gone. Roman stood frozen, the hum of the city suddenly sounding like a threat. He was trapped. The logic barons and their corporate enforcers thought he was a witness to be managed. The bio-choralists, the city's reviled heretics, thought he was a player in their game. Both were wrong. He was just a boy who had answered a message from a dead man, and now he was caught in the gears of a war he was only beginning to understand. Part 3. Descent into the Grinder. The guild's forges were no longer safe. The schematic from Valerius was a key, but using a guild terminal to analyze it now would be like shouting his secret in the middle of the command spire. Every system would be monitored by ACM. He had to go down. The journey from the relative order of the Artisans' hearth was a physical and spiritual descent. With each level he dropped, the city transformed. The air in the mid-strata, home to the proud traditional guilds, gave way to the superheated, chemical-laced atmosphere of the central strata. The ambient hum of life support systems was swallowed by the deafening, soul-shaking roar of the forge floor. He emerged onto a gantry overlooking the heart of Arsia Prime. The scale was inhuman, a cavern so vast it generated its own weather systems of steam and smoke. Below, in the stark industrial glare of Zone 1, the ACM assembly lines stretched to the horizon. Swarms of tireless robots assembled other robots in a perfect, soulless ballet of automation. The only human presence was the occasional logic baron acolyte, watching from a climate-controlled booth, their face illuminated by the cold blue light of a data slate. This was the future the barons wanted: clean, efficient, and utterly devoid of the messy, unpredictable art of human hands. A profound sense of loss and anger tightened in Roman's chest. He skirted the edge of the floor, moving toward the periphery, toward Zone 3, toward the grinder. The grinder was a massive, decommissioned ore processing plant, a metal skeleton illegally repurposed as the epicenter of the city's dustpunk culture. The moment he stepped inside, the ordered cacophony of the forge was replaced by a different kind of chaos. Deafening music pounded from jury-rigged speakers, holographic graffiti writhed on rusted metal walls, and the air was thick with the smell of recycled biomass brewed into potent, illicit spirits. This was the city's great, anarchic neutral ground, a place where corporate spies, choralist recruiters, and guild artisans could disappear into the anonymous, churning crowd. He found who he was looking for in a corner stall, hunched over a workbench cluttered with scavenged tech. Cask. She fit the archetype of the dustpunk info broker perfectly, a self-aligned survivor, navigating the treacherous currents between the city's great powers. Her augmentations were a chaotic collage of mismatched parts. A powerful, industrial-grade hand from a mining rig grafted onto a slender arm. An optical sensor scavenged from a military drone, glowing where one eye should be. She was a walking testament to her own fierce independence. An artisan, she grunted, her mismatched eyes taking in his guild-issue overalls. You're a long way from home, pretty boy. What do you want? Roman showed her a heavily encrypted copy of the schematic fragment. I need to know what this is. I need it unlocked, quietly. Cask let out a low whistle, her optical sensor whirring as it scanned the encryption. This is old, deep guild, nasty stuff. It'll cost you. I don't have many credits. I don't want your credits, she said, a predatory smile touching her lips. I want access. Your guild has priority clearance for the ACM central inventory logs. I need a manifest, a shipment of rare isotopes scheduled for transfer to the Olympus Mons Directorate. Get me the manifest, and I'll crack your ghost story. Roman's blood ran cold. Slicing into a secure ACM server was a capital crime. The Directorate was the nerve center of the Shadow Council, the most secret place on Mars. But what choice did he have? He was already a liar. What was one more step into the darkness? Deal, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Part 4. The Chimera Flaw. Cask's workshop was a shielded Faraday cage tucked into a forgotten maintenance conduit behind the grinder, a nest of scavenged tech and tangled wires. The air hummed with the energy of overloaded power conduits and the smell of ozone. Roman had done his part, his hands shaking as he'd used his apprentice credentials to slice into the ACM network and divert the manifest to a dead-drop server. The guilt was a physical weight, a stain on his soul. Now, his fate was in the hands of a cynical info broker with a scavenged military eye. All right, artisan, Cask said, her fingers flying across a custom-built console. Let's see what your ghost wanted to show you. The schematic fragment bloomed on her main screen. It wasn't a weapon design or a secret blueprint. It was a QOM diagnostic overlay, a complex waveform diagram showing the quantum resonance patterns of a matrix during the final stages of fabrication. To Roman, it was familiar, a more complex version of the readouts he studied daily. Looks like standard QOM tuning, he said. Look again, Cask muttered, her own mismatched chrome whirring as she cross-referenced the pattern with a trove of black market data she'd scraped from public and private networks. She pulled up an ACM industrial accident report from a year ago, the official report on the scaffolding collapse that had killed Valerius. She overlaid the resonance signature from Valerius's schematic onto a seismic reading from the accident report. The patterns locked together, and the truth, monstrous and obscene, stared back at them from the screen. The Logic Baron's great ambition, Project Chimera, was a catastrophic failure. For all their talk of pure, rigorous science, they had been unable to replicate the intuitive art of the Artisans. Their logic had smashed itself to pieces against a wall of human creativity they could not quantify or control. But they hadn't given up. They had moved to a new, desperate phase. The schematic was not a diagnostic of a QOM being built. It was a recording of one being destroyed. They had been attempting forced neural imprinting, a barbaric attempt to bypass art by literally scanning and copying a living artisan's mind directly onto a blank matrix. The tremor hadn't been a correlist attack. It had been the result of this horrific experiment. The process hadn't copied Valerius's genius. It had shattered his consciousness, unleashing a psychic and quantum shockwave that had physically cracked the bedrock of the city. Valerius hadn't fallen from a scaffold. He had been the first human test subject. The ghost signal wasn't a message from him. It was the last agonized data screech of his mind being torn apart. Roman felt the floor drop out from under him. The men who ruled his city, the paragons of logic and order, were monsters. They hadn't just murdered a master of his guild. They had used his very soul as raw material. He looked up from the screen, his vision blurred with horror, to see Kask's face. The usual cynical amusement was gone, replaced by a cold, transactional focus. "The truth," she said, her voice flat, "is a commodity, and a truth this big has a high price." Her thumb brushed a hidden switch on her console, a silent alarm. "Nothing personal, artisan," she said, her scavenged eye glowing a dull red. "It's just business, and ACM just made the highest bid for your silence." The heavy metal door to the workshop slammed shut, the sound of magnetic locks engaging echoing like a death sentence. Part 5. The Echo in the Scars. Panic was a fire in Roman's lungs. He was trapped, sold out. But Kask had underestimated the desperation of a cornered apprentice. He grabbed a heavy, industrial-grade plasma cutter from her workbench, cranked it to maximum, and sliced through the lock mechanism on a rusted service hatch in the floor. A plume of foul-smelling air billowed up as he wrenched it open. The sounds of ACM security boots were already echoing down the corridor. His only way out was down. He dropped into the darkness, into the deep scars. This was the city's basement, its forgotten foundation. A labyrinth of abandoned mining tunnels and geologically unstable caverns, inhabited only by the city's outcasts and scavengers. The air was cold and damp, the silence absolute and oppressive, broken only by the drip of water and the low, terrifying groan of stressed rock. It was a journey into the city's literal and metaphorical heart of darkness, the place where all the failures and forgotten things ended up. He ran, stumbling through the blackness, guided only by the faint, emergency lighting strips that marked the main tunnels. He was hunted alone, carrying a truth that could burn the city to the ground. He found his way into a vast, derelict mining cavern. The darkness so complete, it felt like a physical presence. He was cornered. A beam of light cut through the gloom, but it wasn't from an ACM drone. It was a handheld torch. The woman from the transport hub, the biocoralist agent, stood at the cavern entrance, flanked by two others. They were silent, their movements fluid, their eyes fixed on him. "We tracked your comms heat signature," she said, her voice calm. "Kask was always a risk. Now give us the data, Roman. It's over." Before he could answer, another light sliced through the darkness from the opposite tunnel. A high-powered ACM security drone hovered in the air, its weapon systems targeting him. The security chief's amplified voice boomed through the cavern, shaking dust from the ceiling. "Surrender the data, Roman. You are interfering with matters of state security. Don't throw your life and your career away for a terrorist lie." Roman stood, frozen in the crossfire, a single boy caught between the two great, warring faiths of his world. The cold, brutal logic of the machine and the fervent, dangerous heresy of the flesh. The coralist agent took a step forward, her hand outstretched. "That data is the truth, Roman," she said, her voice an urgent, compelling whisper. "It can free this city from the Baron's tyranny. It can shatter their lies and their power. Give it to us. Let us grow a new future from the ruins of their failed logic." He looked from her zealous eyes to the cold, unblinking lens of the ACM drone. He clutched the data slate, the weight of Valerius's stolen soul heavy in his hand. He had three choices, each one a world-ending catastrophe. He could surrender to ACM, save his own life, but bury the truth forever. He would be allowed to return to his life, to the forge, but he would live as a ghost, haunted by the knowledge that the men he served were murderers, their entire society built on a monstrous lie. He could give the data to the biocoralists. He would be a hero to the rebellion, the man who exposed the Chimera Flaw. But he would be handing a lit torch to a faction of fanatics, plunging the city he loved into a devastating civil war, trading one set of tyrants for another. Or there was a third path, an act of insane, desperate faith. He could bypass them both, use the slate's own broadcast function to send the raw, unredacted data to every comm in Arsia Prime, to the guilds, to the dustpunks, to the families in the commons. He could trust in the people, in his own guild, to see the truth and choose their own future. An act of pure, terrifying democracy in a city built on secrets. The security chief's voice boomed again. "Roman, your final chance." The choralist whispered, "Decide, Roman. Now." He looked down at the data slate in his hand. He was no longer an apprentice. He was no longer a pawn. He was the keystone. The entire fragile structure of Arsia Prime, its power, its future, its soul, rested on his choice. He raised the slate, his face set in a mask of grim determination. His thumb hovered over the interface, the light from the screen illuminating the terror and resolve in his young eyes. He pressed down.